Hey there, this is Ross Izzard, and this is the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast, where we talk about fly fishing in more interesting places when it gets really freaking cold. This week's episode is about the deep fall and the psychology of cold, which I know is kind of a weird title for a fly fishing episode, but we spent some time last winter talking about the ins and outs of how you fly fish in the winter, and how you fly fish in the fall for that matter. And I think there's more to say about that. We will talk a little bit more about that here in this episode, and I'm sure in future episodes, but I think we covered it well enough that you could probably go back and listen to those and get a sense of how I fish in the winter and in the fall. It doesn't mean it's the only way to fish. It's just how I fish and how I found success, and it's been successful enough that it has been replicated for me for many years, and as a result, I am, I guess, stuck in my ways when it comes to how to winter fly fish, which interestingly, is something we're going to talk about today too, because you don't want to get stuck in your ways in cold weather, or you might have a bad time, particularly during that transition season. But I think that there are kind of two things going on when we start pivoting out of what I call turnover season, so that kind of flip season where everything is starting to pivot from summer to fall, to when it really falls off into cold weather season. And for that purpose, I don't really distinguish much between deep fall, so we're talking like late October through November into the beginning of December, and actual winter, which kicks off really in December, and at least in Colorado runs through about the end of February or the middle of March. And, I don't think that there's a ton of difference there as far as how I fish them, but I do think that there is a different psychology involved for the angler from that early fall phase, the flip phase, to the deep fall, to the winter. I think that there's just a different mindset that comes with being cold and everything that comes along with being cold, and is an interesting kind of psychological case study that directly impacts how well you fish, how much success you have when you fish, and just sort of how enjoyable or not enjoyable, as the case may be, the experience is for you out there when we start really getting into those cold weather situations and cold water temps. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I wanted to open with just sort of a little bit of a story. And we talked about this a tiny bit last week when I explained a little bit about my trip to Mongolia. But as I mentioned, we were floating a river way, way up north. It was basically the headwaters of the Amur River, far north of Mongolia, really not far from Siberia. And in fact, we ended about, a half mile or a mile from the Siberian border with Russia. And it was cold, guys. I mean, my understanding is there was a group out on the upper river the week before we were there. It was relatively warm for them, 60, 70 degrees. They were comfortable, having a great time. They had heated gears. And then we showed up to raft the lower section, which somewhat ironically is further north. We didn't have heated gears. We slept in teepees every night except for one. And the weather just sort of fell off a cliff. It was actually kind of amazing how quickly the weather fell off a cliff. And it went from being very temperate for the group before us to being downright cold for us. I mean, we would wake up in the morning with ice crystals forming on the walls of the teepee, ice on our sleeping bags that needed to be melted off at the single wood-burning stove that we had in the camp over in the mess tent. I left my boots out one night, and the laces froze so solid that I couldn't tie them. I had to pour boiling water into them so that I could actually get my feet into the boots. Our waders would freeze in the mornings. Our lines would freeze almost all day, especially for those morning hours and especially in the shade. Line ice, guide ice on your fingers, ice on your gloves. I mean, it was cold. It truly was savagely cold up there at a level that, even though on paper it probably didn't look a lot different than what we would experience in a western river here in Colorado during the wintertime, it sure felt different, right? And I'd be wearing 4 or 5 layers in the drift boat and still be cold. We were just kind of cold all the time. So you'd wake up in the morning, you'd run to the wood-burning stove, you'd try to warm up as best you could. You'd get in the boats, you'd freeze your ass off for 10 hours or however long we happened to be floating. I mean, we were often floating 20-plus kilometers a day. And then you would run back to the stove when you got back to try to not die of hypothermia. And I noticed something there were 2 things I noticed. First of all, in the beginning of the trip, when we first started, there was this sort of interesting psychology among both the anglers and the guides that was like a strange mixture of confusion and disbelief, right? because the weather had been so nice the week before, and then suddenly it was so cold, and it was this kind of hard, abrupt transition as far as the weather goes. And that was really tough, I think, for people to adjust to. It was hard for the anglers to adjust to. There were guys out there who had been there the week before and then carried over into this week. And suddenly it went from being, hey, I'm good without a sleeping bag to, oh shit, I need some extra blankets or I might die in my sleep in the teepee. And also, I think a little bit for the guides because, they're rowing all day. Their hands are getting wet on the fish. They're working. They're tying knots. We're working. We're tying knots. And suddenly everything just gets harder in the cold, right? Anybody who listens to this podcast or who has spent time fishing in the wintertime, fly fishing specifically, knows that things just get harder, right? Things don't work right. Your hands don't work right. Your body doesn't work right. It's harder to tie the knots. It's harder to touch the fish. It's difficult. The human body was really not designed to work in extreme cold. And once you throw water into that, so wetness of any kind, then things start getting exponentially harder. And that transition from easy to hard, all of a sudden, sort of tripped everybody up. And that's something I want to talk about a little bit today, not just in the context of Mongolia, but just generally in the context of switching over to winter. But the second thing I noticed is that after we sort of pivoted out of that, so you got through the initial shock of, oh shit, it's really cold now and things are starting to freeze, then you sort of settle into the cold. But when you settle into the cold, it's a different feeling. It's a different vibe than you get when you're out there fishing all day in the warm, right? So fishing all day in the late spring or the summer or even the early fall is just sort of pleasant, right? There's no grind to it. I mean, yeah, you might have a storm. You might have some weather conditions. I'm not saying it's always perfect and sunny, but for the most part, it's relatively straightforward, right? You bring a rain jacket, you bring a fleece, and you're pretty much good. And then suddenly it's really, really cold. You need specialized equipment, specialized gear, and it just sort of changes your outlook, right? It goes from, how do I just want to fish and fish and fish until the sun goes down to, how do I survive this? And if you can cross that threshold from, okay, how do I make it survivable to, how do I do this and have it not completely suck? Maybe try to eke out some meaning or some fun from it. That's a totally different mindset. And it occurred to me while I was floating down this river in Mongolia, watching the sloughs on the side of the river freeze up, looking at the ice in my guides, that there is just a totally different psychology to cold weather and cold weather fishing specifically. It's a totally different experience. It's a totally different outlook. And it's just a totally different way of thinking and being and experiencing the river. And I think that is worth talking about. So those are our kind of two buckets I want to talk about. The first is the transition and the need to be flexible during that transition. And the second is how you sort of manage your mindset when you're going out to fish in the cold. Because if you don't do that, you go into it with the wrong mindset, it's really easy to become one of those people that's like, oh, it sucks and I don't want to do it. I hate it. When the truth is, it is different. It does suck a lot of the time, if we're being honest, from a physical perspective. But if you can manage your expectations, be flexible, and manage your mindset, manage the psychology of the cold, then you can be a successful angler all year round. And you don't have to stop fishing just because it's wintertime. You can stay out there. You can stay reasonably comfortable. I'm not going to lie and say that you're going to be always comfortable out there, because you're not. And to be honest, that challenge is part of the fun, as we'll talk about. But it is important to keep in mind that the cold changes things for you, for the fish, and for the river. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's start with that first bucket, the shock and awe bucket, for lack of a better term, right? This is when you've been fishing in la la land, is kind of how I think about it, right? So you've had this wonderful summer season, warm weather season. The fish are hungry, especially if you're fishing these backcountry streams. They're coming up, they're eating dries, they're eating streamers, they're eating nymphs, they're just doing their thing, and you can fish whatever you want. The freestones are open, the tailwaters are open, the big rivers that are usually just so full and so crazy that you can't fish them for months during runoff, those are all open, and the world is your oyster, right? There's really not much snow on the ground. There might be at elevation, but in most places, the trails are open, you can access them, the river is open, it's fishable, the water's there, and you can kind of get spoiled. Right? And so the summer is like easy. You're just out there doing your thing. You're exploring, you're hiking, you're fishing. Fall rolls around and you sort of brace yourself for it, because guys like me are like, now it's the fall and things are going to be different. But the truth is, if we're being honest, it doesn't feel that different when the fall rolls around. And in fact, I have been surprised almost every year that I've been fly fishing that I sort of expect there to be this crazy change as soon as we cross over into fall. But the truth is, the early part of it doesn't feel any different than summer, right? You've got these sort of wonderful weeks where you're still throwing dry droppers or grasshoppers or whatever. You're still fishing dry flies. The fish are still active. The water temperatures are still great. The spawn hasn't started yet. And you're just having a blast. You can still go out. You can fish. In some ways, it's better because it's not hot at lower elevations. The storms have kind of petered off by that point. So you're not having these incredibly violent thunderstorms every day. And you can sort of trick yourself into thinking, man, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing because it's lovely. And I don't blame you for that. There's nothing wrong with doing what makes you happy. And if it's still working, then by all means, carry on. But then something happens, right? So after that, you hit that transition season, the shoulder season, the flip, as I call it. And we did talk last season a little bit about fishing the flip and how to stay successful with that. And the flip is an interesting time because it's all compressed into this really short period. It's usually just a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks if you're lucky, where things really start turning over. The water temps start coming down, weather starts changing, the fish behavior starts changing, and they start moving around a little bit. But even during that time, you can still sort of pretend like it's good weather fishing, right? You don't need Arctic gear to be out there. Yeah, it's probably a little bit chilly, but you're not cold. And you can sort of trick yourself into thinking that you don't need to change much, right? Yeah, maybe you change a little bit of the water you fish. Maybe you find a few more on nymphs in deeper holding sections where they're getting ready to overwinter. But the truth is you can kind of keep rocking with it. And then all of a sudden, that transition period just stops, right? And now it's winter or deep fall, whatever you want to call it. It's cold weather season. And then everything changes, right? So we've talked about this before, but fly fishing in cold weather, and really specifically fly fishing in cold water with ice involved and very low water temperatures, which is much more important than the air temps, as you all know, is a completely different game. It's almost a different sport. I mean, yeah, we're still using fly rods. We're still tying flies onto it, but the water types you're fishing completely change. The holding patterns of the fish completely change. The flies that you're using completely change. The tactics that you use change. The gear that you use changes. And it is this crazy shift to this new world, right? Where your old tactics don't work and the fish aren't in those riffles where you used to find them or in the pocket water. And now you got to fish these deep pools and you're going to go from catching 20, 30, 40 fish a day easily on whatever the hell you want to catching 5 to 10 fish a day and having to work your butt off for those fish with teeny tiny midge patterns or whatever other kinds of nymphs. You're going to have to put away your dry flies, right? The hoppers are gone, so you got to stow those and put them away. You're not going to be throwing stuff on your little 3 or 4 weight dry fly rod anymore. You're going to be bumping up to a 5 or 6 weight and throwing nymph rigs. And it is such an incredible change that something that I have noticed both in myself and in other anglers is that if you are not willing to accept the change, you can get stuck in the I'm going to fish how I want, damn it mode, which is to say that you just can't quite let the warmer season go, right? And you might say, I would never do that, Ross, because I'm a very educated angler and I'm very sophisticated. I listen to your podcast. I listen to all the other podcasts, and I would not do that. But I bet you do it, right? I have definitely been the guy who's still throwing a dry dropper in like the first week of November because that's how I like to fish. And I'm really hoping a fish will come up and eat it. And sometimes they will, right? And then it confirms and you're like, oh, I caught one fish. I'll keep doing that. Or I might be the guy who's like, well, I don't want to use midges yet. I want to stick to Betis patterns and I want to stick to caddis patterns and I want to see what they'll do. I don't want to switch over to the old, porterhouse steak and chicken nugget fly combo that we talked about last season. I don't want to stand there and slowly nymph deep pools. I want to fish the faster water and the riffles and the tail outs. And you can do that. And I do that. But I will often be out there, and I bet a lot of you are similar. I'll be out there doing that, and I will know in my head that that's not the right way to be fishing. It's not the most effective way to be fishing. It doesn't really recognize what's going on with the fish or with the river at the time, and it just isn't really all that productive. And that's silly, right? Being inflexible and being unwilling to change what you're doing because you've had so much fun over the sort of primary season will really hold you back as an angler and will affect your psychology heading into the really cold weather and cold water conditions. And so in this first bucket, I really want to encourage you to be willing to let it go, right? It's almost like a bad breakup or some type of trauma or something bad happened to you. And somebody at some point, maybe it's your therapist or your friend or your girlfriend or your wife, doesn't matter, whatever, or your husband, whatever, looks at you and says, hey, just let it go, dude. Like, just let that go. It's over now. Move on. And it's the same thing with the river. Let it go. It's over. Move on. Because otherwise what happens is you don't do that. You waste a bunch of time not being productive, not being flexible, not shifting your gear and your mindset and your tactics. And then the result is you wind up having less fun. You catch fewer fish, you have less fun, and you wind up sort of burning these days and weeks, however often you happen to be out there, that could be spent being effective and being productive on the water if you were just honest with yourself about the fact that the river has crossed the threshold. At the risk of getting too meta here, every river has a Rubicon, right? And there's a certain point, it's fine. And then suddenly those water temps drop down just low enough. And this is usually once they start hitting like the low 40s, I find that it tips over. And now it's not the same game anymore. And if you continue trying to act like it's the same game, you just aren't going to have a great time, right? And this can take a lot of forms. It could be the flies that you fish, like I mentioned. I mean, it might be that you really want to throw those damn dry flies when the truth is dry flies over, dude. Get out your indicator, start indicator nymphing or Euro nymph if you must. You guys know how I feel about that. But hey, if you got to do it, then do what you got to do. But let it go. Stop throwing dry droppers. It's probably not going to work. You're asking too much of those fish to come up and eat that. They're not in the water where you think they were. They don't want to come up 4 feet from the bottom of some deep hole to get your dangling little nymph that's, a foot below the surface. It's just not going to happen. Let it go, Tie on a nymph. Tie on a Griffith's net if you really want to fish dries, but better yet, don't do that. Put on an indicator and get your nymph rig rolling because it's time to start nymphing, whether you like it or not. You can leave that dry fly rod at home, bring your nymphing setup, and just say, well, river turned over, time to hit it the right way, and just go with it, right? Same thing with your gear, like I just said. I mean, the other day I was out fishing, it's been kind of warm and we're sort of at the tail end of maybe being able to get away with this. And I've been watching a dude fish a section of stream, not a backcountry stream, but just a stream near town. And I was just watching him fish a little bit as I passed by. And the guy's throwing a double dry rig. He's got like a big hopper and then a parachute Adams trailing behind that. And I walked by him. I mean, I could see him clearly. He was down at the bottom of a embankment and I was walking above him. So I probably got to look at the guy for, 10 minutes, maybe 15 as I was walking by because it was such a long section. And he never caught a single fish, ever. He was fishing a riffle. He was fishing some pocket water. He was throwing these dries, and I never saw him touch a fish. I went way up above him because high-holing sucks, and I didn't do that to him. Fished for a couple hours because that's what I had, and then I came back down, and I saw him. He was still in the same spot, throwing those same 2 dry flies at the same water, and it wasn't working for him. Now, look, he might have caught a fish in the interim, maybe, right? But the fact of the matter is, it just was time to let it go, right? I don't want to do it either, but I'm out there with the nymph rig at this point because it's time to move on. You can leave the dry fly rod home. He's doing his beautiful cast, and that's fine. But that guy would have been better off just leaving that shit in his rod vault or in his garage and moving on to something for winter fishing. And the same thing goes for locations, right? So we talked a little bit last season about finding your winter water and how to pick locations to fish. And so we really have talked about that to a pretty good degree at this point. But still, I will find myself going out and trying to fish water, which in the fall is already super low, right? There's almost no water coming into the system. That means those water temperatures start to plummet, especially overnight. And the freestones kind of start locking up, right? You're going to start seeing ice on the banks in the morning. You're going to start seeing ice in the middle of the river and forming on the rocks in the river. Or, when you have a piece of deadfall, you're going to see icicles hanging off of that thing because those rivers are turning over, right? And they are not controlled by dams. There's no temperature modulation going on. It's all just natural, which is a beautiful thing, but it's time to let them go. It's time to recognize that those are no longer the rivers that you get to fish for the next several months. They're done. They've turned over. They've crossed their Rubicon. And it's time for you to let them go and move on to the tailwaters or the spring creeks or whatever else you can fish that still has temperature modulation going on to make sure that you're not fishing frigid water where the fish aren't going to eat. And I've been so guilty about this that I'll sometimes catch myself on like a small creek or a stream in like, God, I don't know, November, way after I should be there. And I might pick up a fish or two, but like it's, right? You know when it's done, you know when it's over. And I'm out there and I'm just like, what am I doing? There's no reason. This place needs to be left alone. It needs to rest. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing to let the water rest, right? In a lot of cases, those streams have brown trout or brook trout in them. They're trying to spawn. Even if they don't, it's not a bad thing to let the rainbows and the cutthroat rest and just to give them a little bit of room and give the river a little bit of room and just say, bye. I'll see you back here next year. And I don't want this to sound too woo-woo, but to be honest with you, I have like a little ritual. The last time I fish a stream, and I kind of know when it's about to turn over, when I'm done, I'm done. I catch my last fish, I put my flies away, I climb out of the water, and I'll say thanks. I'll say, hey, thanks, old friend. I loved it. What an awesome season we had. Bye-bye. We'll see you in the spring. And I'll leave. I'll talk to the river. Now, I don't think the river can hear me. Don't get me wrong. I'm not out there doing shaman dances. But just out of respect for the place and acknowledgement of the ecology of the place and the conditions of the place and what's happening in the natural world around you, sometimes it's time to just tip your hat, say bye, I'll see you next spring. And if you can do that, if you can be flexible about these things, about how you fish, about what you bring to go fishing, about the tactics you use, and about the places you go, you are going to have a much better time because you're not going to struggle through that period of pretending that it's still something that it's not. You can just move on to cold weather and cold water tactics. Life's going to be better for you. You're going to catch more fish. You're going to be less frustrated. Trust me. When it's time to let it go, boys and girls, just let it go. Now, the second part of this is sort of related, right? But now we're going to move away from the fishing stuff, which is important, recognizing when you're done fishing a certain piece of water a certain way, and instead start talking about your psychological state and your expectations of being out there, right? So in the summertime, your real press, yes, you're working around storms and weather conditions and other stuff, but for the most part, your only real constraint is daylight, right? And even then, as long as you're happy to hike with a headlamp on, you can stay out after dark. And it's really about, how much time can I spend on the river? How long is it going to take me to hike back to the truck? The questions are about quantity of time and quality of time on the river. They're not really about hardcore fishing related challenges. The hike might be hard. The conditions might be hard. The terrain might be hard. The navigation might be hard. But once you get there, the fishing is relatively straightforward. And it's just a matter of how much you want to do. Once you fall off a cliff, though, once you're past the flip and you're into the cold water season, and cold weather season, now it's a totally different game, right? So now you're going to be suffering a little bit. You're going to be cold. Your hands are going to be cold because you got to have your fingers out to be able to manage the line. Your face is going to be cold. Your head might be cold, especially if you're bald like me. You're going to have to wear additional layers. And even then, you might still be kind of uncomfortably cold. You're going to go from wet wading to having to wear actual chest waders, right? And then you're going to have to go from wearing actual chest waders with stocking feet probably to wearing big, heavy, insulated boot foot waders because your feet will start getting too cold in that frigid water. And it just starts to get cold and it starts to get hard when it gets cold. And the psychology of that can feel oppressive, right? And I can remember many times, but I'll just give you one example from actually last season. I went out, I hiked into this canyon at the bottom of a reservoir. It's a tailwater, obviously. And, the hike's not hard, but it's steep enough that you have to climb down. There's actually a rope involved that you have to use to get down because it's so icy. And I hiked down in this canyon and I was fishing and I was nymphing. Obviously, I was catching pretty good fish in there. But it's snowing and it's cloudy and it's cold. And it just felt, as much as I love being there, as beautiful as the place was, it just felt oppressive to me, right? It felt like it wasn't what I wanted it to be. I was standing there and I would catch myself thinking, man, I wish it was warm. Man, this winter fishing thing sure does suck. This was relatively early in the winter. And what was happening there was that I had not yet, number one, been flexible enough about the transition, but number two, I had not really made my peace with the fact that you're just playing a different game, right? You're not going to be warm and comfortable out there all the time in the winter. You're going to be cold and uncomfortable most of the time. And you need to expect that, right? You need to expect the fact that you're probably not going to see any people out there, which is a good thing, right? I don't really want to see people out there either. But I'll often talk to people who are like, man, I was out on the river and I didn't see anybody all day. And it was spooky. And it's like, well, it's not spooky. It's just cold, right? And then you have to accept the fact that for whatever reason, human beings are sort of wired to view the cold as being lonely and difficult, right? We don't think about like a Christmas movie, right? Like you don't see people huddled up in the snow with icicles all around them because we interpret that with being cold and uncomfortable and alone and sad, right? We think about people in the warm house, surrounded by their family and friends, wearing sweaters, drinking hot cocoa, being comfortable, right? Same thing with the outdoor stuff. I mean, we just don't spend a lot of time as people in those environments because those environments can feel very lonely. And it's kind of hard to articulate that because there's no particular reason that it should feel different, right? It's not different. It's the same place, same canyon, same thing. But it is different and it does feel different. And when you're standing off in one of these canyons and you're by yourself, the parking lot's empty, there's nobody there, the sky is gray and overcast, it's snowing on you, it's cold, it's kind of dark and gray, the water is cold and sort of dark and gray. It does feel different. It does. It feels heavy. And it can feel very lonely. And if you are used to, being out in the glory of the warm weather and the sunsets and you go into it with the same mindset, the outdoors just don't feel the same in the wintertime. They don't. And I think you have to accept that psychology heading into the cold water season in order to have a good time, because otherwise you'll go out there and you'll just kind of find the whole experience depressing, right? And I've had these periods where you're like, man, I go out, I got line ice going on, I got guide ice going on, my hands are cold and they hurt. I'm lonely and it's snowing and I just want to go home and be warm and see somebody. And I'm a guy, I spend a lot of time outside, guys. I mean, hundreds of days a year. I don't usually get lonely out there. I'm fine being by myself, probably 95% of the time. That's not normal psychology for me, but something about that switch changes something in me. And I find that if I can go into that experience, go into that canyon, go onto that river with the expectation that, hey, this is different. It's going to feel different. I'm going to interpret it differently. My psychology is going to be different. The experience is going to be different. I'm going to interpret it and just generally be present in it in a different way with different challenges and different hardships than I am in the warmer months. Then I'm good. But I got to have that mental frame, because if you go into it and you're still in summer fly fishing mode and then that sort of cold, tyrannical oppression comes down on you from the winter, it can be tough. And I think that that's a lot of why people stop fishing in the winter. Yes, some of it is physical discomfort, right? It's hard and it's painful and it's cold. But I really do think that a lot of it comes from the fact that people are not prepared for that sort of weird psychological shift of being cold. It's just a hard thing for human beings to do, and it kind of messes with your mind. And I really do think a lot of people respond to that by just saying, well, I'm just not going to fish in the winter, which is really, I mean, it's fine. If you don't want to fish in the winter, that's fine. It's fair. I certainly fish less in the winter for this same reason. But I think if you can understand the psychology and recognize it as it's happening to you, and just know that human beings as a species, as an animal, are wired to have this sort of averse, almost emotional reaction to being really cold. If you're ready for that and you see it coming and you can anticipate it, you're going to just have a different experience because you're going into it with a different mindset. And I think the mindset is really the trick, right? You got to be framed the right way in your head. And if you are, you're going to be able to kill it out there and have a great time fishing in the winter, even though you will be cold and uncomfortable. And if you don't, you're just not going to have a very good time. And that sucks because you control your mindset. You control the way you think about this stuff. You control whether or not the psychology of the cold really starts to impact you. And that's incredibly important, right? So going back to Mongolia, one of the things that I noticed is that by the end of the week, I mean, we'd been out there for 8 days, and it was just getting colder and colder and colder every day. And there was this one day where we're floating down the river and we're in this canyon. The sun's already down. There's no sunlight on the water. And there's this howling North Siberian wind just ripping down the river and hitting us in the face. I mean, it was right in our face for miles and miles and miles. And we had been cold for days, right? I mean, it's like we'd never really truly warm up. I mean, yes, we'd go sit in front of a stove and it was lovely. And the guides and the outfitter did a wonderful job of making sure it was as comfortable as it could be, but it still wasn't comfortable. And it's amazing to me how much that ground me down, right? So, and not just me, but the others on the trip. I mean, there are guys out there that were serious steelheaders who fish in the cold all the time, people that were guides in Alaska. And we didn't complain about it. It's not like we were, sitting around crying about how cold it was and we wanted to go home. These were serious outdoorsmen and serious fishermen who were out there. But by the end of the week, you could kind of see it on their faces. It was wearing them down. You're tired and you're tired of being cold and you're hurting and you're miserable. And it's amazing to me how quickly that wears people down. And I think, yes, that's an extreme example because we were out there for days and days on end in the cold. But I think it happens in microcosms when you're fishing in the winter, just in general. It's like you go out on a Tuesday and it's freezing cold, and you go out on a Sunday and it's freezing cold, and you go out the next Tuesday and it kind of starts to grind you down. It grinds down your motivation. It grinds down your level of effort. It just makes you kind of feel like you don't want to fish anymore. And that's a really trippy thing that I don't know that I've ever heard anybody really seriously talk about in the context of fly fishing. I mean, people who are mountaineers and other outdoorsmen are well aware of the sort of psychological impacts of the cold. So are many governments, which is why there are so many open air prisons in cold places, because they know that if you really want to break somebody down, put them in the cold, man. That's the fastest way to break a person down psychologically. And I think that is simultaneously one of the cool challenges of the winter. You're really pushing yourself. You are seeing how far you can go with this thing. You are pushing through adversity, pushing through hardship, pushing through discomfort, pushing through psychological framing that isn't the nicest. And it is sort of a challenge and a fun challenge at that. But it's also something to watch out for, because I think if you are not paying close enough attention to it, you can get yourself in trouble. And when I say get yourself in trouble, I mean a couple of different things. The first one is you could go and just have a really shitty time, right? Which is obviously not why we're out there. We're out there to enjoy ourselves and to find some peace and to do something that we enjoy and to meditate and all of those things that we've talked about here over the last few episodes and the last few seasons. So yeah, it could cost you on that front, but it could also cost you in other ways, right? So being psychologically unprepared for the cold can become a safety issue for you. If you're out there and you're not in the right gear and you're grumbling and you're just sort of like, and you're refusing to do the things you need to do in colder environments or icy environments or snowy environments, if you are unwilling to reframe your thinking around this stuff and therefore walking around frustrated or angry or distracted or any of those things, you can get yourself in actual trouble, right? You could slip and fall in the water. And now you've fallen in cold water and you've got a serious, potentially life-threatening situation on your hands. You could slip on something like a chunk of ice or a snowbank and go for a fall and hurt yourself. You could, depending on where you are, trigger an avalanche or something else and get yourself in trouble. You could miss the sound of an ice dam breaking upriver and get yourself in trouble before that surge gets to you with a bunch of icebergs floating in it. There are a lot of things that can come from being in the wrong mind state, being frustrated, not paying attention because you're frustrated. Because really, you've probably noticed this, when you're mad or frustrated or upset, it can be pretty hard to pay attention to what's going on around you. And that can sort of cost you. And then beyond that, you just are going to start getting into your own head about this, right? And so much of fishing, to be honest, is about confidence. It's about knowing that you know how to catch fish, knowing that you know which flies to use, knowing that you have a firm grasp of the techniques and the tactics that you need, knowing that you understand trout and you understand water and you understand maybe that specific river where you have to be fishing. And it can kind of lead to this interesting place or this interesting thing where you start psyching yourself out. You start going, well, I thought I was a really kick-ass fisherman back in September, but now it's November or December and I can't get a bite. I can't get them to eat, and I must just suck at this. And that starts kind of slowly, right? It's not something that you say to yourself right away. It's not like you just are like, oh, damn it, I'm an idiot and I don't know how to do this. It happens sort of slowly, but it'll creep up on you. And once it creeps up on you, what'll happen is it starts to erode your confidence, right? And so that matters inside the day, right? You've probably noticed that when fishing's tough and your confidence is low, the chances of you turning it around that day and picking up more fish, pretty low. And some of that's because of the conditions or whatever is making the fishing tough. In this case, probably cold water or pressure changes or something related to the fact that it's, winter and cold outside. But it can also affect you in sort of a macro sense, which is to say it can start to shake your confidence in yourself as an angler. And you can start to doubt yourself as an angler or think you're not very good at it or think you don't know something or feel like the puzzle is unsolvable. And once you feel that way, once you have sort of made that unfortunate mental jump, then you start getting yourself in trouble. And I have found, I'll be honest with you, I've had episodes like that, especially early on in my fly fishing journey when I really genuinely didn't know what the hell I was doing. There were days where I was like, you know what, maybe this just isn't for me. Maybe I'm just not very good at it. Maybe I ought to quit. And that little voice in your head that says, hey, maybe you suck at this and maybe you ought to just let it go. That voice will destroy your growth as an angler. And as we keep saying, this whole thing really is about growth and about mastery. You really cannot grow and you cannot achieve mastery in anything. It doesn't matter whether it's exercise or some other activity or music or writing or work or anything. You cannot achieve those things if your psychology and your mind state are wrong. And if you are in the mode of, I suck at this, I'm no good, my confidence is in the tank, the chances of you learning anything are basically zero. The chances of you growing, which requires learning something, basically zero. The chances of you having enough fun that you want to keep going out and doing it, basically zero. And as a result, your motivation will be basically zero. And, fishing is one of those things where it's not often talked about in the context of discipline or self-discipline, but it is, in a lot of ways, self-discipline. Because one of the key attributes I find of anglers in general, but especially fly anglers, and really double especially fly anglers who fish through the winter, is mental self-discipline, right? The knowledge that you're going to have tough days out there. It's going to be cold. You're going to be miserable. The conditions are going to suck. It's going to hurt. The fishing is going to be slow. And having the mental fortitude and the self-discipline to say, that's fine. I'm going to go out. I'm going to still fish. I'm going to learn what I can learn. I'm going to take from this experience in this river what I can, even if it's a tough day, and then I'm going to grow, and I'm going to integrate that into the things that I know, and I'm going to add it to my repertoire of knowledge and flies and tactics and everything else. That is the trick. And then, even if it's a bad day, I'm going to get up again next week. I'm going to go back out there and do it again. And if it sucks that day, I'm going to get back after it the week after that. And if it's really cold the week after that, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go again, and I'm going to keep doing it until I turn this thing around and figure out what I'm doing, or until I start to realize why it's not working. But in either case, we are talking about self-discipline and the stick-to-itiveness or the grit required to really hang through psychologically tough days on the river. And there is no day that is psychologically tougher in fly fishing than being in cold water in a cold canyon, catching no fish, all by yourself with no idea what the hell is going on. And that little piece of human psychology is such an incredibly important thing to wrestle with as an angler that I really hope that the next time you are out there thinking about, this just sucks and I'm frustrated and it's not working for me and nothing is coming together. I hope that you will hear that voice in your head and go, I see you and I recognize you. And I'm not going to listen to that. I'm not going to throw a temper tantrum. I'm going to learn. I'm not going to quit and go home until the spring. I'm going to stay out here, grind through it. I'm going to learn. I'm not going to just assume that it's an unsolvable puzzle or I'm a shitty fisherman or I should have a new hobby. I'm just going to keep rocking. I'm going to keep getting better. I'm going to keep growing. All of those things. And I don't mean to give you like a hallmark motivational speech here, but I really do think that that is part of the fly fishing game in general. It is certainly part of the backcountry fly fishing game. And it really is one of the main pieces of growth opportunity that we find in the colder months. The ability to conquer the psychology of the cold, to show up anyway, to fish anyway, to learn anyway, and to get better anyway. And if you can do that, not only are you going to have a better time, not only are you going to be able to frame these days the right way instead of the wrong way, but you are going to be a hell of an angler. And by extension, a hell of a person. Because once you learn how to cope with that stuff and persevere through it, you're going to be able to translate that into other parts of your life. And that's really the beauty of what we're doing out here in the wilderness. Yes, it's about the wilderness itself and the skills it takes to be there, but so many of these skills are transferable to work, to relationships, to your personal life, to your workout routine, whatever. These are all basically pieces of code that you are integrating into your brain system, your computer operating system running in your head, that are going to make you a better person in addition to a better angler, but only if you go into it with a clear understanding of the psychology of the cold and how to manage that psychology. So guys, I hope you didn't mind a little bit of soapboxing out here and a little bit of exposition at the end of this episode, but I do think that this is an important thing to talk about that just doesn't get talked about very often. And I really hope that the next time you're out there on a cold day, working through the cold with your brain screaming at you that you should just go home, that you will remember this episode, that you'll stick through it, not to the point of being unsafe, as always, don't be stupid, but stick through it, learn through it, grow through it, and just keep getting better. And next week, we'll be back to talk more about what to do when the fishing sucks, when you really are just having a bad day. Are there alternatives to just standing out there flogging the water and hoping for the best? Spoiler alert, yes, there are. And we're going to talk about those next week. But in the meantime, take this, think about your own psychology in the cold, recognize those little nagging negative thoughts when they pop up in your head next time you're waist deep in a snowdrift, casting into icy water. And I hope you're going to get out there, keep fishing, keep doing your thing, and come back ready next week to learn more and stay after it. Have a great week, guys. We'll see you next Friday. Till next time, this is Ross, and maybe I'll see you out there. But only if the cold didn't break you.